My name is Marissa Evangelista, and I am an MFA intern. I will be your host tonight for tonight's Wil Talk with Artists. Our digital discussion tonight is with multimedia artist Michael Gouker. Michael recognized early on in his life that he wanted to become an art teacher and began pursuing that dream in Frostburg State University. He taught art for over 40 years at different schools, and he also taught at the Washington County Museum of Fine Arts. Now he works professionally in a variety of media, such as watercolor, pen, graphite, and so much more. Additionally, I would like to introduce the host of our show, Will Scott. Will is an art historian with an extensive career as a photographer and the former head of adult programs in the National Gallery of Art. He's uniquely qualified to bridge the gap between artists and the public.
Well, thank you, Marissa, and more than thanking Marissa, although she keeps us all going here. Thank you, Michael, for agreeing to participate. It's always a pleasure to meet a new member of the MFA and to get to know them and their work a little bit. So
glad to do it.
Good. And I think we want to start a little differently than we have been doing this, partly because Michael, I learned only after we decided that he would be our guest tonight, that he's at least a national celebrity, if not an international celebrity. And I'll show you why when we look at the first slide, Marissa. When you look at this image, might be able to guess how important and how well known this image is. But while you're thinking about that, Michael, I'm going to ask you to just go ahead and tell us the story of how really internationally or nationally known this image is.
Okay, it starts with the show Sunday Morning, CBS Sunday Morning, which uses a sun as their logo. And then over the years, they've invited viewers to send in images that they've created to be possibly used on the show. So I think it was 2010, I sent a picture of this, and this was very low tech. I had a copy made at a printer and sent them the paper copy. And I didn't expect to hear much about it, but I got a nice letter from Jessica Frank, who was in charge of the sun images and what were used on television. Very nice handwritten type note that it appreciated my entry and they would put it on file and let me know. And I thought, well, that's the last I'll hear that. Then 3 years later, I get a call Sunday morning, I forget the time, probably 7:30, 8 o'clock, from her saying that they were going to be using it on the show that day. So I was very thrilled that that was going to happen. Very surprised. I didn't get much notice. They did send me a DVD of the whole show. Now the image was on television for maybe a second, because they use a lot of these images and they go from one thing to another. And so it was lead into the weather. And that was pretty much it. Back in 2020, I heard from them again saying they were going to do a calendar, a daily calendar with some of the images from the suns, and they had 9,000 images to choose from. And mine was going to represent January. This is what the calendar looked like. Just a desk, pull-off daily calendar. But of course, it was published. They were selling the calendars, and it was published by Simon and Schuster. I was to get a fee for permission to use the image, but I could keep the image, and that was just permission to use it. So I don't know how many calendars were made, but I guess I'm hoping millions. I don't know. We'll see. I was supposed to get rich and famous from this, which didn't happen, but it was still quite an honor to be, because Sunday Morning, if you don't watch it, is one of the best shows on television.
Absolutely.
It's just kinder, gentler 60 minutes, I always say.
Yeah. Well, Michael, that's a great story. And I really do envy you. My wife and I try to watch Sunday Morning when we can. I was fortunate at the National Gallery when I worked there to meet Charles Kuralt and briefly talk with him. So he was one of my favorite TV personalities. And
right.
I envy you greatly for your success in getting this accomplishment.
Very proud.
Well, the other thing that...
Go ahead.
The other thing that I think we need to say to everybody right now, because it's going to affect the way we move forward in our hour, is that because you have such an eclectic approach to subject and media, we've racked up more images here for our conversation than we usually do. And I want to cover as many as we can and still leave time for questions from the audience. So I'm going to try to move us along a little bit, but that's a fascinating story, and I appreciate you sharing it. Now, elephants are, as a photographer and just as a person, elephants are, I think, endlessly fascinating. And I think you've really brought out some of the aspects about elephants that fascinate me, but I'm very, very interested in your technique here. So you want to tell us a little bit about Ambika and about how you created the image?
First of all, Ambika was an elephant at the National Zoo. She died 2 years ago at the age of 70 or 72, I'm not sure which. She had been there most of her life, rescued, and was spent her time at the zoo. She's an Asian elephant. They used to have African elephants, and I might have drawn one of those later. The technique is something that I sort of developed on my own. I use a technical ink pen, it's like a mechanical refillable ink pen. And I draw little tiny, it's kind of hard to tell on the slide, but every little circle is drawn one at a time. The idea being that the bigger the circles are, the lighter it is, like on the edge of the ear, and then around the eyes, and the wrinkles are dark. So the real drawing looks a little bit better than this, but that's the basic principle. I sort of developed this technique by accident back in around 1975, just doodling a little bit, and I realized that principle, the big and little circles, what they did, and then I started to draw actual objects and experiment with it, and experiment with pens and different things like that. So this drawing is about 11 by 14. Well, there it is on the screen, 17 by 13. That probably took 10 hours, maybe at the most. I've spent as much as over 50 hours on a drawing.
Michael, may I interrupt here for a second? Because
sure,
I think we understand how you did this. And what interests me is that it's so very effective. And I wanted to, when I first saw your image, this image and similar ones, I thought that they were aqua tints. Are you a printmaker?
No, this is all hand drawn. One circle.
And so you didn't have any experience with different printmaking techniques. You just really did stumble upon this on your own in your studio.
Yeah, I had a student teacher at the time I was teaching, and I had to observe her and kind of pass the time. I'd doodle, and I came up with this basic idea.
Yeah.
The one drawback is you don't overlap the circles. They're all touching each other, but they're not separated and they're not overlapping, which if you know about stippling, you put a lot of dots on a piece of paper, and the more dots you get, the denser it is and darker, but you can't, of course, with any ink technique, you can't take it off. You can't erase it there. So this goes faster than stippling, but it's also not sort of fixable. It's what it is, and you can't correct it.
Well, the other thing that it made me think of as you were explaining it is those of us who are a little older remember when newspaper images were black and white and created with what were called Ben-Day dots. And it was, the dots were black. So it's the inverse or reverse of what you're doing, but it had a similar effect. You've got a lot more clarity here than that produced in newspapers, but it's very beautiful, and I like the subtlety. Here's an African elephant.
Yeah, this is Nancy. This is 22 by 34, as you can see. I took pictures of some of the animals back in the 80s and had black and white prints made from them, and I've milked those photographs for probably several dozen drawings. This one is not the biggest, it's probably the second biggest one I've ever done and most complicated. Nancy, I didn't know who Nancy was until about 10 years ago. I took a field trip with some kids to the National Zoo, and I took some photographs along. asked the handlers if they knew those, and right away one of the handlers said, "Yeah, that's Nancy. She died in 2000." And he gave me the name of a person who was on the board of directors of Fonz, and I got in touch with her and met her, and we had some really fascinating conversations. This is a little different. You can sort of see, because it's a wider picture, the blending of the ideas, not blending of the circles per se, but just the effect that it's lighter and darker.
Yeah, yeah.
I do a very, very precise pencil drawing first, draw every wrinkle, every crease, every shadow. I'm tempted to point to it, but you can't see me doing that. And I'm very, very conscious of negative space. There's nothing in the back. There's just a little shadow at the bottom. And I spend sometimes hours cropping, not physically cropping, but putting strips of paper or Post-its on a photograph to determine what I'm going to have, what I'm going to include, how much space at the top, how much space at the bottom. I did a drawing once that I cut a strip off of, about a 4 or 5 inch strip. It represented about 6 hours of work, but I knew that it had to come off to be a better composition. And then you get into the
You're in good company. You know, many of the major artists, printmakers too, but especially painters, do that probably with the same reluctance you did it, but they know that's the right thing for the work.
It wouldn't be so bad if it was a quick watercolor, but to spend 6 hours on part of a drawing that you're cutting off is a little.
Now I see over your shoulder there's an elephant. Is that part of a series? Did you do a whole sort of series of these African elephants?
I've done, quite a few. I've done quite a few of just Nancy. I've got several photographs over. I do sections. I do an eye, then a bigger eye, then a wider angle, do it horizontally, vertically. That's Nancy, the one you can see over my shoulder. That's twice as big as the one on the screen. And that one, the one in the room here, took about 50 hours, between 50 and 55 hours. I thought it was going to take longer. When I started, I thought, well, this is going to take like 100 hours. I took a big deep breath and started doing it, and got done faster than I thought it would.
Yeah. Well, they're fascinating, and elephants, of course, are fascinating because they're so intelligent and seem to have strong personalities, individual personalities too.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah. Well, now this is a graphite drawing, but graphite drawings can be so different in the way the artist handles them. And I looked in the reproduction that I'm looking at on my screen, like you've used a number of different methods of applying the graphites. So can you say a little bit about that? Am I exactly on track with that?
Well, it's all one technique. It's cross hatching. Okay. With just a number 2 pencil, just a Dixon Ticonderoga pencil. One of the tricks is I sharpen pencils with a knife, a utility knife or an X-Acto knife, a trick that I learned in college because that's what our teacher made us do. But you get I get a really precise, almost needle-like point. I even sand it off a little bit. So all these, again, I want to point to stuff. Everywhere, everything you see is just layers and layers of cross hatching, not blended. I was old school when I taught. I would not let students smear things with their fingers or a stump or tissue or anything. They had to just draw it darker, pressure, just cross hatching, any kind of method that would get the job done, but not to rub it or smear it. So everything, this is a medium-sized drawing, 22 by 15. Again, it's a giraffe from the National Zoo, from a photograph that I took, and then you get into the wrinkles and the hairs, and it's an interesting process, but it's very time-consuming as well.
You have a real sensitivity to light, I think, and this is a great demonstration of that. The light sort of bathes the giraffe head and follows the natural contours. And you mentioned photography. Of course, to be a photographer, you really should be ultra sensitive to the effect of light and dark. Does your photography, do you ever display photography, exhibit photography? Does it have any impact on work like this?
I use my photographs as resources, but I've never exhibited photographs. But I do love taking pictures, and I am pretty sensitive to light and dark shadows. Sometimes I walk around the house in the evening and notice shadows of leaves from a plant or shutters or things, abstract things like that. And
Yeah,
again,
sometimes I do the same thing and I'll take a picture because I am a photographer. So I'll go get my camera and think, oh, that's really interesting. And so
yeah,
is this also the same thing, but with colored pencil
this is
instead of?
colored. Yeah, this is colored pencil. Not so precise about cross hatching. The hardest part about this, if you look at the white hairs between the eye and the ear,
Uh-huh.
those are made by incising the paper with a sharp. I use an old kid's compass, a real sharp point of a compass. Scratch into the paper, and then when you take the pencil over the surface, it doesn't fill in the scratches. Paper stays white, and that's you have. There's no such thing as a good white colored pencil. If you tried to draw those in with that, it would just be milky, and it wouldn't work. So you have to, like the whiskers at the bottom of the drawing. Those are drawn with two lines, one on each side of the whisker, and then filled in around them. And the other thing about colored pencil, you can't do much with regular pencil, with graphite, because the graphite resists the colored pencil. So if you have a lot of graphite on the paper, when you put the color on, it's not going to work. So sometimes you have to do the pencil to get it in place and then erase some of the pencil so that you can fill it in successfully. And a lot of it is just pressure. This is really not much cross hatching in as far as the technique is concerned, just blending with it gets down to I'm just precise about everything. It gets down to how sharp the pencil is, whether it has a flat edge on it or a flat point or a pointy point, all those kinds of things.
Well, this is really a tour de force of texture as much as light and shadow. And I'm fascinated by the eye. Is that, I can't tell on my screen, is that a reflection as one would see in an eyeball?
Yes. Yeah. This is a clouded leopard from the zoo again. And I was able to take some pretty close up pictures. Get the eyes are really the fascinating part.
Well, it is a tour de force technically, and a very beautiful, lifelike rendition. I'm quite impressed. I'm always fascinated when I see somebody doing work with a ballpoint pen, because I could never write neatly with a ballpoint pen. It would always smear, and I get those little drops of ink. And so how did you manage this with such precision and delicacy?
Well, after a few failures of the globs that you're talking about with a cheap Bic pen that comes in the box of 12, I decided I needed to get a better pencil. So I happened to be at White Flint Mall in DC, and there was a writing store, paper and writing. They had a cross pen that was about a $70 pen. They were going out of business, so I got it for like $15 or $20 or something. But it's a really precise and very reliable pen. It doesn't have blobs and skips and things like that. You have to be careful, but if you have a good pen, it's not going to wear out halfway through, because sometimes with a cheap pen, you're halfway through and you get a glob and you can't erase it. It's the other thing I started out in college using a nib pen dipped in a bottle of India ink, and we would go out on location and do that. And of course, you'd get a drip or a blob or something and have to make it into a bird nest in a tree or something, so you wouldn't waste the paper. But this is cross hatching. It doesn't show up as well on the slide, but it's cross hatching and sort of combination of cross hatching and pressure. As you can, the dark spots I pressed harder, but I went over and over and over them. The hardest parts are the lightest parts, the around the middle of the shoulder. It's shaded. It's not the white of the paper, but you have to be very, very careful. You don't press on the pen too much, or you'll get a dark line that you didn't really want. So that's you can see the cross hatching in the stump a little better.
Yeah. So is it fair to say that this is then very similar in the technical application of the pigments as the previous image?
You mean
the way that you're handling your instruments is very similar between the previous image and this one? Yeah,
pretty much, except of course you can use a lot of different pressures. You can do it easier with a colored pencil. You can just kind of drag it across the paper, and sometimes you can do that with a pen, with a ballpoint pen. Just barely, don't put any pressure, just drag it back and forth across the paper.
Do you use the different media because you feel that that will serve your goals better in the image, the subject that you've chosen, or is part of it just the fascination of being able to experiment and explore with the different mediums?
Probably the latter, because I'll get in a mood to do a bunch of watercolors. So I do a series of watercolors, and then I do some pen and ink, and I do the Volkswagen that you saw in the room here. Now this, it's a tad out of focus. That's my fault. I think the picture wasn't as good. This is doodling. I do a lot of I sort of say mindless doodling, but it's not really mindless, because I start somewhere in the middle and I work my way out, and then something leads to something else, and then more of that, and lines and dots. And eventually I have to think, well, am I going to make this into something good or serious? Then I have to think about balance, have to think where the dots are, how many the dots are, how much negative space. So every dot, this was done with a #1 watercolor brush, and no plan ahead of time, no pencil drawing, nothing like that. Just start and then see what happens.
Do you sort of use this approach just throughout your day, week, month, year, as the mood strikes you? Is that, or is it something you stop and say, I'm going to try to do one of these more abstract images this day?
Well, today I did some. Earlier this afternoon, I started on a couple of things, and I didn't even finish them. They're just little strips of paper. But I was in the mood to do some doodling. That's a funny word. I hate that word, but just wanted to do some of that. And then sometimes that leads to other things. Like I might take a section of this little painting, and it's very small, way 7 by 7. I might take sections of that and think, okay, well, I can develop that into something else and just use the dots or the lines or whatever. So sometimes they lead to something totally different and more serious.
Well, I think that's great that you've been working for a very long time, and you're still able to find something that is so spontaneous and inventive at the same time. I know I wish I could have that kind of inventiveness that you seem to possess.
Watercolor lends itself to that, because you can just throw some paint down on a piece of paper and just see what happens, and you don't have hours and hours invested in it. Going back to the circles, I did a drawing last year. It's about about 2 feet square, and it was a close-up of one of the elephant's eyes. And when I was finished, I didn't like it. And it was like I'd worked on it for 30-some hours.
Wow.
So I've tried to fix it. I haven't thrown it away. I'm going to give up. I'm not giving up. I'm going to do something with it eventually. But that's kind of failure.
I understand. This is an acrylic painting, and it's a fairly substantial size and very abstract. If I saw this next to, say, the elephant we looked at first, I might think it was 2 completely different artists. So how does this fit into what we've already looked at?
That's sort of the way I work. The colored pencil work is different from the pen and ink and the watercolors. I just love doing this kind of thing. And I developed, I guess you can see the letters, the stop letters in the painting. They're all there. They all run together. And this took hours to plan and execute to get it. All the lines, the sections are the same width unless they're doubled up, and it's simple, but it's one of my favorite pieces that I've ever done, actually.
Yeah, it's very striking image and very clever, and I mean that in the most positive way. Not clever facile, but clever in inventiveness. Let's go right to the next image. And then I want to take, because it's a watercolor, and I really love this. I love still life in my own work and in work, of all eras. It's been such a traditional and source of inventiveness and pleasure and creativeness for artists of all eras and ages and cultures. But I want to talk briefly about your career as a teacher, because it's been such an important part of your life. But do you find that your experience with your students in the studios helps you in this rather broad creative approach that you take, or is it? I've had a lot of artist friends who they sort of complain about having to spend the time with the students in the classroom. So how do you take that?
Well, you take it a lot of different ways. One thing is I taught middle school for 8 years, and then I moved to a high school and taught 34 more years there. Ended up 2 years at an fine arts school that we have here in Washington County, where students have to audition and apply, and then they go there instead of their home school, so to speak. So a lot of different experiences there. I think working with the kids gives you a little more of a younger attitude about things, because you're in tune with what their fashions and music and social behavior, that sort of thing. So that's one thing. It is discouraging because you don't get highly motivated students. If I have a ninth grade class in the high school where I taught, I might have 30 kids that don't really want to be there. They need a fine arts credit, and maybe a third of them really care about art, want to learn art, and the others don't. It's like they do a piece of work in 15 minutes and say, okay, I'm finished. And they're not, they shouldn't be, they didn't do a good job. And so you fight that a lot, you fight attitude. Now the Barbara Ingram School, the fine arts school, I was just part-time, I was an adjunct, but that was like a dream job because they wanted to be there. It was an honor to be there. So if they were inclined to misbehave, which none of them would have, they could get sent back to their home school, and they didn't want that. They wanted to be there for 4 years. And they have floors for music, chorus, drama, creative writing, orchestra, band.
So overall, it sounds like it was a positive experience to you. You could take things away from the stimulation that the students and their youthfulness gave you.
Yeah, you have to kind of be patient with the ones who don't care, the ones who may, use profanity directed at you. And I've heard many that.
Michael, I don't know how this will make you feel, but yes, I was going to say we'll move on, but I don't know whether this will give you any solace at all. But when I was in junior high, I had to take a studio art class at my public high school, and I was one of those kids that would sometimes throw remember those old sort of brown, look like a stick of butter erasers that you would use?
Oh, yeah.
I would throw them at the teacher when he turned to draw on his sketch pad. I got in a lot of trouble, but I guess in the end, something stuck.
Yeah. Well, I always tried to tell the kids that, if I had to sing for a grade and stand up in front of other people, because I think one of the reasons the kids got frustrated, they didn't want anybody to see the work. They didn't think they were any good. They were insecure. Yeah. And then for somebody I guess they thought I was going to hold up a bad drawing and say, now look at this. Will's drawing is terrible. What did he do wrong here?
Yeah.
So
well, that was definitely part of it for me, I can assure you.
Well, I was told in college for a singing contest with my fraternity, just move my lips and smile, don't make any noise. So it worked because we won the competition.
My father was told that in his high school chorus, and I was in a fraternity that was noted for its singing, and I was told the same thing. So I got a lot of sympathy with you on that one.
Yeah, I know. Nothing you can do about it.
When I first saw this image, I thought of a visit that I made to the Harley Davidson Museum in Milwaukee, and all of the gleaming chrome and the complex patterns of the machine. Let's call it a machine here.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that what got you going on this?
Well, you know what it is. So
yeah,
I took a lot of pictures close up. I was frustrated. I did play saxophone a little bit in high school. And then our son got a saxophone when he was in high school. And I said, I don't care whether he quits playing it, but I'm going to keep it because I want to have one myself.
Yeah. So
this is just a very close up black and white photograph. The photograph was actually only about 4x6. And I love detail. I love close-ups. I love sort of the idea that you don't know what this is. Like you could be. I've had people guess what it is, and they're like completely all over the place. So it's very very tiny but again, I like to work small sometimes.
Yeah, yeah. It really forces you to think about, you have that little area and what you're going to put into it and how much you
Yeah.
can put into it,
And
right?
again, the cropping and what you leave in, what to take out, so on.
Let's go ahead to the next image. And yeah, this is one where I'm going to do the little art historical shtick that I often do when something in the artist's work triggers it. You went to art school, you've taught art for a long time. It's been a major aspect of your life and of course your career. Are there any particular artists that you are interested in and have admired? And this is an image where, to me, as a historian of American art, I immediately had a couple of thoughts in that regard, but I want to hear what you have to say about that.
Well, probably one of my biggest influences, I'm not in his category, obviously, is Winslow Homer, because I love the watercolors that he did more than his oils. I love the freedom, the looseness, the runs and mistakes that people would say, well, that was pretty sloppy, or that was this or that, and you can see the sketches and that sort of thing. Now, this was, I have a little photograph that I took in New York, and I use little resources sometimes. This is medium-sized painting, and I did this. I guess I think I did the color first and then did the ink over top of it. And it probably was 10 or 15 minutes. It's like you either do it quickly and it works, or it doesn't work. You can't labor over it. The lines are crooked, they're sketchy, they're loose, they're off. There's no just technical accuracy in some of it. The sky is kind of sloppy, but that's the way I like it. I did a series again. I get into these series of either subject matter or medium.
Well, I don't think that there's anything sloppy about it. I think it really is very cohesive, even though it is loosely drawn and painted. And what I thought of, or who I thought of immediately, and I'm very pleased that you mentioned Winslow Homer. I think he's the greatest American artist of the 19th century. But the next generation of great Americans, John Marin.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because, of course, Marin was influenced by Homer and under the influence of European modernism, painted in a more fluid and expressive style, which I think you've done very well here. And do you know a lesser known contemporary named Abraham Wolkowitz?
No, I don't.
Okay, you might want to look for him online because he
that.
was even more abstract than Marin. Painting skyscrapers in New York City and such. And this is, of course, just sort of the next step, if you will. This is more like Wolkowitz in its abstract nature.
This is a tiny little painting, 5x7, and this probably took 5 minutes or less, because when I paint with total abandonment, it works sometimes really well.
Yeah,
like I said, you either get it or you don't get it, or you throw it away, or you but when sometimes I have the attitude that I don't care how this is going to turn out. If I spend 30 hours on an elephant drawing, I want it to turn out when I'm finished. I'm going to spend 5 minutes on a watercolor. It might turn out, it might not. I might not like it when it's finished. But if I paint not caring what it looks like, it's usually more successful.
I think that's a wonderful attitude for all of us. Sometimes it's just that freedom, that spontaneity that is the spark that makes a work of art really powerful and connects with other people. So
you can overwork a piece of work. You can overwork it and lose.
Kill it. You can kill it by overworking.
Yeah.
All right. Now we're getting to your landscapes, and I want to be sure that we get as many of these in as we can, because again, your approach is so different, the way that you have represented the subject. So Oracoke tree in summer. So is this literally something that was done en plein air in front of this subject, or how is that?
No, again, photographs. It's Ocracoke Island down near Cape Hatteras on the Outer Banks of North Carolina. And it was originally just a black and white drawing with the circles and the lines for the limbs in the trunk and so on. And I thought, well, maybe this needs something else. So I just kind of hit on the idea of putting in watercolor washes over top of the ink. And it's this was actually, I think this was accepted in a show at the Circle Gallery a couple years ago. So this is totally different. I mean, look at this and look at the New York paintings, and it's worlds apart.
Yeah, yeah. And it's unusual, I think, for artists, particularly artists that are more mature, to be able to go back and forth so successfully. You know, most of us hit our stride with something that we realize we're pretty good at and that serves our needs, and then we stick with it. But I really am impressed by your continued experimentation. And
creativity has always been important.
Yeah. So let's make sure that we show the audience all the images before we open up for questions. I don't know. This might be the one that I think is most Marin-like and
yeah,
the one that appeals to me the most. So, and it's so fluid. So it's
yeah, it's the same. It's a tiny little. The size is actually the frame. It's much smaller than that. This was a scene, again, I did from a photograph down the Miles River down near St. Michael's on the Eastern Shore. And I wasn't even sure if I liked it when I did it. Sometimes I'm very insecure. I'm like, well, is this good or not? Then I'll show it to my wife, and she'll quickly tell me whether it's good or not. She's sitting over here, so I can't say much. She's very honest.
My wife is very honest also, and she doesn't necessarily like the direction that I head towards in my work, but at least I get an honest opinion.
I get a thumbs up and a thumbs down sometimes.
Oh yeah.
But I thought it was, I like the sky, how loose the sky is, and just quickly. You do it fast, you don't touch it up, you don't go back into it, you just do it.
Yeah.
So,
all right, let's look at the next one, please.
This may be the last one, actually.
Good. Like, we'll put that back on the screen.
All right.
Thank you. Well, as I said a moment ago, Michael, I think that the variety of approaches and subjects and the way in which you are able to handle them is very impressive. Sometimes in the art world, we tend to think that an artist that is so multifaceted is somehow less significant. But I'm like you. In my own work and in the work that I admire, I like to see somebody that has this kind of range. And I think it says that they understand what is important to them, what they value, and they're able to find that in different, more varied ways. Is that fair for me to say about you?
Yeah, and along those lines, when I just taking watercolor, if you look at the watercolors that I've sent you, most of them are kind of loose and free, but I've done some watercolors that are almost photographic. I did a painting of a guitar, like an electric guitar, and it almost looks like a black and white photograph. And that was totally different from this. Well, and I think, well, maybe I should stick to something, one thing or another, because if you could put most of these pieces of work here together in an art gallery and think that there were 10 or 15 different artists involved.
Well, and then I think that's a testament to your talent, the range of your talent. So I would be proud of that if I were you.
Well, thank you. That's good to. I don't have some. The question I hate the most is when some will say to somebody, "I'm an artist." Oh, well, what do you do? What kind of artwork do you do? And it's like, how do I explain this?
Yeah.
It's not that easy. Well, I paint apples. I do oil paintings of apples all day long.
Well, I'm glad we tried to and did get in so many of your images.
I appreciate that.
And heard you talk about them as you did so clearly, because I think that's one of the things that makes you distinctive as among the artists that we've talked to on our series. And now I think we've done a pretty good job with Marissa's help in moving along and getting all the images shared. And so let's go ahead and open up for questions.
All right, so we do have a question already. Someone would like to know, how do you select the paper for each drawing approach or drawing medium?
I work mostly with Bristol board, which is a heavier paper, smooth. I use it, well, it comes in a couple of different textures, but I use the very smoothest. And I also use illustration board, which is almost about the thickness of matte board. And I use for what I do with the animals, I like to use the smooth paper for that as well. Now for the watercolor, I use just normal watercolor blocks. But usually it depends, whatever the media depends, it sort of dictates the surface, because some you can rub and dig into it, others you can't. So it depends on what you're working with, I think.
I have kind of a mundane question related to that. What is there a single source where you can get all of these different materials, different kinds of implements that you use, or do you have to kind of search them out?
We have a very good art store in Hagerstown. It's called Howard's Arts and Frames. It's on the east side of town. They've been there for like 40 or 50 years. It's a young lady that runs it now. I've worked there as a framer. Now she's the owner. And I get them to do the framing because they're very, very professional and very, very good with suggestions of colors and that sort of thing. But pretty much, yeah, they're pretty old school about it. It's like with the technical pens that I use, that the pen that I use is called a brand called Mars Stadler.
Oh,
they
yeah.
they don't even exist anymore, but I guess Rapidograph bought them out. But I have worn out the tips of the pens over the years, and you can buy new tips. Now that gets tricky because the ink tends to dry in the pen, then you have to take it completely apart. There's a little tiny wire inside the pen that looks like a hair. You have to be careful not to bend it, and you have to rinse it out and put it all back together again. So that's a little tricky, but I've managed to buy extra pen points that hopefully will take me to the end of all of this, I guess.
Well, let's not think about that yet, but it's good that you've got a nice source of your materials.
Well, when I started with the circle things in the 70s, I just used felt tip pens, and I found pretty quickly that they faded. So I did some pretty large drawings in circles, and then the half of it, just half the color just sort of faded away. So I had to, come up with this. The hardest thing is coming up with a fine tip colored pen that you could use, because sometimes I'd like to do the circle things in color, but I wouldn't be able to do anything really large. I think the pens would run out pretty quickly.
Oh, okay. All right. Any other questions?
I do have a question, actually. So, Michael, I'm curious, during your artistic career, did you find yourself as a multimedia artist consistently working with a variety of work, or did you ever have a couple years where you were just super interested in a certain media?
No, I more of a variety,
Yeah.
and I did a little bit of sculpture in college. I did some of that. David Smith was a big influence for sculpture, that sort of thing. If you could look him up. Never got. I have a sort of funny story about oil painting. I had an oil painting class in college, and the teacher was old school. He'd just sit there with one hair on a paintbrush painting something, and then tell us to loosen up, loosen up. So he had a still life set up one day, and after 45 minutes, he walked over to me and said, "Stop." I said, "What?" He said, "Stop." He said, "Don't, it's finished. If you keep working on it, you're going to ruin it." So that was sort of a compliment, I guess. So I sat back for the next hour and just watched everybody else work because I was finished. Yeah. And that's the only oil painting we've ever framed and hung in our house.
Well, he knew what he was doing then.
He knew exactly what he's the one that told us how to sharpen pencils with an X-Acto knife as well. So that was definitely old school.
Yeah. It's funny that you told that story, because one of the artists that I was interested in as a scholar of American art was a man named William Merritt Chase. Mm-hmm. He was one of the most popular and influential acclaimed American painters at the end of the 19th century and just into the 20th century. And he taught tens of thousands of students, literally, including at famous places like the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts and the Art League in New York City and all of this. And one of the stories about his studio practice that I remember was him doing the same thing to a student, walking up to them and making them stop in the middle of class because he thought they'd finished the work and they didn't need to do more.
Yeah, that's tough with oils and acrylics.
Yeah.
At least you can cover it up and go do something else, I guess. But
yeah,
that's always a decision.
Yeah. All right. Well, if there aren't any more questions,
There
although
is
I think
another
another
question,
came in the chat, right?
So someone wants to know, speaking of the fading with the felt tip pens, how do you preserve the graphite drawings and the colored pencil drawings?
I just frame them under good glass, like museum or gallery quality glass. It's not non-glare like the old kind of fuzzy stuff, but it's better glass. And the ink drawings, I have ink drawings here in the house that are 40 some years old and they haven't faded at all. The ink that comes with the technical pens, it's really good. Colored pencils, I have never had anything fade. The colored pencils, I should mention this, the colored pencils I use are Prismacolor pencils. They're a kind of a waxy pencil. I think that pretty sure they wouldn't fade very much, and the colors are nice and rich, and they don't smear them, and you can rub over them. They get almost a waxy sheen on them sometimes. But you can probably get at least 150 to 200 colors. You can buy a set, but then you can buy individual pencils. And I don't know I haven't bought any for a while, but the pencils one at a time are probably over $2 a piece.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of know what you're doing. And then I sharpen those too with a knife. There are sharpeners for colored pencils, but I've never actually purchased one. Sometimes that's the worst thing. You work for 5 minutes sharpening a pencil, then it snaps off accidentally. And you have to start, especially if it's a $2 pencil.
Yeah.
But
Well,
I use them
Michael,
down. Go ahead.
No, I don't want to cut you off if you still hadn't finished.
No, that's
your
okay.
thought.
That's
okay,
fine.
so I have one last question of my own, and then if there aren't any other questions from the audience, I think we'll wrap up. And that is, with all of your experimentation in these different media and your freedom in some of your watercolors, have you ever experimented with pastel or used pastel extensively?
I've used it. I like it, but maybe I'm a little leery of the mess that it creates. I like it, but it's a lot of dust and But yeah, I think pastel is wonderful. Yeah.
Okay. Are there any other questions?
There is another question. Are you familiar with the Colored Society of America with respect to the standardization of archival qualities?
No, I'm not. This Watercolor Society, yes, but I'm not sure what they're getting at with the standards.
Okay, then. All right. Well, Michael, it's really been a pleasure getting to know you and your work better. And I don't know whether it has something to do with our generation being essentially the same, but I find that there's so many things that you've talked about that I find I think about in exactly the same way. So
yeah, I could sense that too. We had a lot of things in common that these other younger people don't know about.
Yeah. Well, anyway, it's been a real pleasure having you, and thank you again for being willing to share your work with us all. And thanks everybody who did stay inside on this beautiful spring day. And Marissa, as usual, thank you for your very important help today.
Yes, thank you, everybody. It was my honor to do it.
Okay, Marissa, did you want to remind everybody about when these things become live on YouTube and anything else we want to plug?
Yes, so the recordings will be live on YouTube, usually about a couple weeks from the day of the recording. And we usually do send notifications when they are up on YouTube. So make sure that you are also on our email list as well, so you can get those notifications.
Okay. All right. Well, see most of you or all of you, I hope, in 2 weeks for the next Wil Talk.
Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you, Will, and
care.
thank you, Michael, and thank you everyone else for coming along.
Have a great evening.
Have a
Thank
good one.